With so many games releasing on a daily basis, and so many of those games being a mixture of various genres combined together, it isn't all that often that you can find one that ticks all the boxes. Sometimes you're looking for a wholesome RPG, but maybe not the FPS or strategy elements that come with that. Or maybe you're looking for a strategy game, but not one that has tower defense elements. So when you do come across a game that does tick all those boxes, it is something to get quite excited about. And the game we're looking at today is one such game. Void Bastards is a strategy shooter developed by indie developer Manchu and published by Humble Bundle, and is created by the development director of BioShock and System Shock 2. It released on May 29, 2019 for PC, Mac and Xbox One, and is priced at €29.99. Void Bastards gives the player utmost freedom to handle their objectives along with solid combat and excellent strategy, and roguelike elements which are combined with wacky and humorous characters and enemies, and an absorbing atmosphere to create the most addictive and British intergalactic journey you will have ever embarked on. Void Bastards takes place in the distant future where a prison vessel called the Void Ark is stranded in the Sargasso Nebula, a place full of pirates, space whales and derelict ships that's inhabitants have changed into inhuman beings. With all the staff and security of the Void Ark gone, the AI is left in charge, a true British virtual gentleman right down to the hat and monocle. The AI has no choice but to put the prisoners to work if they have any chance of getting out of the nebula and back to civilized space. The prisoners are being held in the form of a pink powder contained within a plastic wrapper, a process called dehydration, and a part of their prison sentence. Think of it as a packet of Dip Dab, except instead of sherbet, it's dehydrated human and no lollipop. And so one by one the AI starts to rehydrate the prisoners, or clients as they're called, by placing their powdered remains into a ship called the Steve and pouring water in, bringing the prisoners back to their original form. It is here that your journey begins, as you lead the misfits of the universe in their mission to get the Void Ark out of the Sargasso Nebula. You will need to collect the materials required to repair the various systems on the Ark, and eventually you'll be able to initiate the warp drive, bringing the ship to its original and safer destination. But it won't be easy. Don't worry if a client dies though, as each time one is killed, another will take his place and any weapons, upgrades and materials the previous had will be available to the next. They might just need a bit of a cleanup first. The fate of the clients and the Void Ark is in your hands. The plot to Void Bastards is simple yet a very creative one. It is designed to create a setting and an objective, but unlike a lot of such plots, it is one that doesn't show similarities. It is completely unique. The universe and how everything works in it is completely different from that of any other game, and that is what makes Void Bastards' plot so interesting. The characters, the rules and regulations, and the general backwards day-to-day workings of life. What you get with Void Bastards is System Shock's gameplay and setting, BioShock's aesthetic with the humour and silliness of Red Dwarf. When you combine the elements of these three together, you get one of the most outrageous universes, full of crazy characters and rules that you could ever imagine. And that is what makes Void Bastards so special. The plot itself isn't what will get you hooked to the game, so if that alone is what you were hoping for, you aren't going to find it here. But if you can deal with a simple plot and love a crazy universe and all the silliness and sometimes stupidity that comes with it, you will have a whale of a time. Void Bastards is separated into two core styles of gameplay, that being the exploration and crafting side of things with the map and the workshop, and then the FPS and scavenging side of things while you're on board a ship. Let's start with the exploration and crafting. At the start of a run, the character you control is randomly generated. Each character in the game will have their own special traits along with the possibility of a quirk too. Traits grant a bonus of some kind and include Insured, where you gain MERS for every 1% of health you lose, or Gun Nut, which allows you to bring a random 4 weapon on board a ship as opposed to the standard 3. Quirks on the other hand give you a disadvantage of some kind, including things like Smoker, where your character will cough every once in a while, alerting any enemies that are nearby, or Reckless, which blocks the identity of one of the enemy types that are present on a ship, making it more difficult to know what weapons to bring with you. These traits and quirks can be changed and removed by using gene-altering machines found in specific ships, along with there being gene-altering energy fields found throughout the nebula that randomly switch out your character's traits and quirks. The traits and quirks in Void Bastards is a great addition that really adds to the gameplay. The reason for this is depending on what traits or quirks your character currently has, you will need to change your tactics in accordance with them. For example, if you have the Smoker quirk, you will need to keep a further distance from enemies when attempting to stealth past them. The same applies to a quirk where each time you pick up something the character will get really excited about and shout things like woo or yahoo or something along those lines. while the likes of the traits give you a strategic advantage, making a tactic easier to complete or allowing you to do something that you couldn't previously. The Sixth Sense trait is a great example of this. With this trait you'll be able to see enemies on the minimap, allowing you to see them and find a way around them without running the risk of alerting them first. Or the trait that gives you extra oxygen, giving you more time to explore around the ship you are on in a more cautious manner. Of course, those are only a few examples. There are lots of different traits and quirks, all of which affect the gameplay in some form or another, though it is worth noting that some are more impacting and useful than others. But with that said, the effect that the overall mechanic has on the gameplay is fantastic and keeps things refreshing throughout. In Void Bastards, your objective is to move around the nebula, exploring the various derelict vessels and scavenging to find the materials you need in order to progress, along with other materials required in order to craft new and better equipment. While exploring in Void Bastards, you may only keep moving to the right, therefore you cannot go back or move to a ship that you have passed. You do however get some choice in movement and often get multiple choices of different ships that you can move to next. The only rule is it has to be in front of your ship. Each time you move you consume 1 fuel and 1 food. When you move, the food that is consumed will restore some of your health. Run out of food however, you will begin to starve and will lose health each time. All the ships are randomly generated and there are numerous different types of ships that you can board. Each type of ship has its own specific resources associated with it, along with having some special bonuses that are unique to that type. For example, a security ship will have a lot more bullets than that of any other, along with having a gene altering machine that will allow you to remove the quirks of your character and gain or swap out traits. On the medical ships, you can use the machine that restores health points and has lots of spikes and red spikes ammunition types. This results in every ship type having its own specialities and usefulness when it comes to finding supplies. So depending on what you need determines what ship you go to, adding a layer of tactics to the gameplay. Just like with the characters of the game, the ships too have their traits and quirks. Examples of traits include Out to Lunch, where the ship has no enemies, and another where all security systems are shut down and where one of the types of enemies on the ship are allied with you. Quirks include things like Lights Out, where the ship is completely dark and you can't see very far in front of you. Others include Lockdown, where all the doors in the ship are locked and you'll need to unlock them to enter rooms, slowing down your progress. Or another is where the oxygen supply is lowered, giving you less time to explore the ship. As with the characters, the traits and quirks of the ship help change up the gameplay with each that you enter. Depending on what traits or quirks a ship has, your tactics and general strategy of how you go about moving around the ship and surviving its inhabitants needs to change. They offer an added challenge and really help with keeping what would otherwise be a very monotonous gameplay feeling refreshing. But that isn't to say they aren't without their issues. Some of the quirks that focus on hazards such as smoke and fire can hinder you a bit too much. When these hazard specific quirks are active, the ship will just be full of smoke spots and fires. With the smoke spots you can barely go into a room without there being at least 2 of them, making moving around the ship a real chore as most of the time you're going blind. The only advantage with this quirk is that it acts as a smoke screen, so enemies don't see you as easily either. As for the fire hazard quirk, it is like the smoke one where fires are just everywhere. The problem is you can't avoid receiving damage from fires, so if you need to run through them to reach a vital point of the ship, you're going to take damage, even if you jump over them. I found it better just to avoid ships with this quirk altogether than take the massive damage you're going to trying to get around it. There is an upgrade that lowers the damage you receive by fire, but it doesn't make this quirk any more enjoyable to face. Rifts are these portals that you find in the ships that spawn in enemies every once in a while. This quirk goes a bit mad with the rifts, placing them everywhere in the ship in a similar fashion to the smoke and fire quirks. Most of the time you're fine, and all you have to deal with is quite a few weaker enemies. But occasionally you will have a pile of screws spawning in, which are the toughest enemy type in the game. In one instance I actually got sandwiched between 3 of them that spawned in with the rifts within seconds of each other. Needless to say, I died in seconds. While these particular hazards can cause problems, they aren't a regular enough occurrence that they have a major impact on the gameplay. The fire quirk, for example, I only came across maybe twice, while the smoke one only 3 or 4 times at most. They're more of a minor annoyance than anything, and as a whole the ship, quirks and traits work a treat, and really add another layer of depth to the gameplay. The resources, crafting materials and special machines that are to be found on a ship is displayed on the top right of the nebula map, along with what enemy types are present and the traits and quirks of the ship. Due to this information you know exactly what resources the ship specialises in, and you can then plan your route of where you need to go in accordance with what you need. Along with ships there are also other obstacles, bonuses and dangers to be found on the map too. As previously mentioned, there is a gene-altering energy field that swaps out traits and can possibly add a quirk. There are also creatures such as void whales and squids that destroy ships. If you board a ship that has pirates located there at the same time as you, they will board and attack you. There are mines that lower your health if you move onto them, bonus foods, materials, fuel and ammo boxes, and even a hungry hermit who, if you land on his location, eats all your food. There are tons of things going on in the nebula, and it is here that some of the many strategy elements of Void Bastards comes into play. Not only do you need to plan a route to obtain the vital items needed, but you also need to take your ammo supplies, your health, needed crafting supplies, and all the different events into account too. Need some healing? Find a medical ship. Need bullets or zapper ammo? Find a security ship. Need extra kitty bots? Go to an engineering vessel. There's a place for everything in Void Bastards, and you need to be tactical in how you go about when and how you get to these places. Really adds a layer of depth to the strategy. Along with that, there are also torpedoes and warp keys. Torpedoes are obtained from specific ships and are used to blow up void whales and pirate frigates upon either you or them entering the same location. A very useful weapon that can really save your ass, especially later in the game. They are rare and one-time use only, so you should only purposely enter the space with the likes of pirates when absolutely necessary. Warp keys like torpedoes are a rare enough item that allow you to warp instantly to another place on the map. These are one-time use items and are very useful for skipping past locations to avoid dangers or to get yourself on a different route. They are an especially useful item in the harder difficulties where dangers are ever more challenging to deal with. Having all of these small mechanics and strategic elements result in you constantly having to monitor your situation and adjust your route and plans accordingly, which in return creates addictive and exciting gameplay where you just keep telling yourself one more ship, and before you know it, you'll have gone through another 10 ships and about 2 hours have passed. But it isn't just the addictive, varied gameplay that makes the map and moving around in Void Bastards so exceptional, but the attention to detail too. The map doesn't skimp on any detail whatsoever. The UI has been brilliantly designed with all the information you need right there in front of you all the time. That's not including icons that tell you when a ship has a needed crafting item, so you always know if a ship is worth exploring or not when looking for crafting material. And then you have the subtle sound effects when you click on a ship, or how the Walk the Plank music track plays louder and louder the closer a pirate ship gets to your location. It is this small attention to detail that really brings the whole experience to life, even on something as simple as a map, and adds a level of absorption that then also adds to the addictiveness of the game. It's sheer brilliance. Then there is the crafting of the game. There is a total of 49 equipment items in the game, and all are displayed throughout the workbench. It is here that you will unlock these items along with upgrading those that can be made using various materials or parts as you collect them on your journey. At the start of the game you'll have nothing but the standard pistol, but as you collect parts and begin crafting more equipment, you will unlock others to build. There is a total of 15 weapons in Void Bastards that are separated into 3 categories, that being firearms, devices and indirect. For firearms you have the Legislator, which is the standard pistol, the Stapler, which is this game's version of a shotgun, the Toaster, which fires a powerful beam that can pass through multiple enemies and through windows, the Riveter, which is essentially Void Bastards' machine gun, and finally is the Nebulator, which is pretty much Void Bastards' version of a rocket launcher. Each of the guns can be upgraded. The pistol can be upgraded 3 times, Stapler twice, and the Toaster, Riveter and Nebulator once each. Each upgrade increases the weapon's general power and performance. For example, upgrading the pistol increases the damage along with the rate of fire, while upgrading the Stapler increases the damage and the number of staples that shoot out per shot. The indirect weapons consist of explosives and weapons that either poison or radiate enemies. The first is the Bushwhacker, which is an explosive charge that when thrown attaches itself to a wall or floor and upon an enemy stepping into its sensory radius, explodes. You can alternatively throw the bombs and then shoot them to blow them up yourself, which is a very useful tactic for dealing with turrets in the early stages of the game. The second is the Spiker. This weapon poisons any organic enemy which damages them over time. The damage the poison deals stacks up the more times you shoot the enemy, and the more you upgrade it, the better the effect of the poison. It is a great weapon to use against tougher enemies from a distance and the likes of spooks who phase in and out, making them hard to hit with other weapons. The Banger is essentially a frag grenade. You can throw it in the direction of an enemy or even throw it against a wall where it will bounce off and explode after a short duration. It is useful for throwing around corners and killing enemies without putting yourself in the firing line like you'd have to with the Bushwhackers. The upgraded version, the Big Banger, is a more powerful version of the original Banger. The Cluster Flak is an explosive weapon that fires an entire cluster of explosives that bounce around the room. This weapon can be as dangerous to you as it is to the enemies, and really its only use is to fire into a room full of them. A general good tactic is to throw one into a room and lock the door so no harm can come to you, and let the flaks do their work. Once the room is clear of explosives and full of jibs, you can move on. The cluster Flak is a more powerful version with a shorter detonation timer, meaning the clusters release the flaks much sooner than the normal version. Finally is the Red Spiker. This is essentially the same as the Spiker, but instead of poisoning enemies, it radiates them. Unlike the Spiker, the Red Spiker's radiation damage doesn't stack, but to make up for it, it has an AoE effect where anything nearby will also be radiated. This is especially good for enemies with low health such as Zeks, or enemy types like the Patients where they are individual enemies in a cluster, making short work of them all. It is these enemy types that are this weapon's main purpose. Then there are the devices, which are various types of gadgets that each have their own unique purpose. The first is the Zapper. This does exactly as it sounds and stuns enemies. It is especially useful for temporarily shutting down electrical enemies such as turrets and security bots. It can be upgraded twice, with each time becoming more powerful, and with the second upgrade, a shot can stun multiple enemies in close proximity of each other at once. The kitty bots are a distraction device. You throw these robots to the ground and enemies will target them instead of you, allowing you to get around them or make a quick escape if things are getting too dodgy. Upon being destroyed, they will explode, causing damages to any enemies in range. You can upgrade the kitty bots to the unstable kitty bot, which is a tougher and more destructive version of the original. The Rifter allows the player to zap an enemy, taking them out of existence and then placing them where they want, but this can only be done with one enemy at a time, meaning if the weapon already has an enemy in it, you must release that enemy before you can zap another. It is very useful for taking tougher enemies like screws and sealing them off from the rest of the ship by placing them in an already explored room and locking it behind you. The upgraded version, the Hyper Rifter, will leave the enemy confused upon being placed somewhere for a short duration. The Bouncer acts as a shield where any projectiles that hit it will bounce straight off, and with a bit of luck might reflect back at enemies, damaging them. It isn't the most useful item out of the equipment, but can come in handy during times where your health is low as a form of protection to get you out of a tricky spot. Finally is the Scrambler. When fired at an enemy, this device makes them allied with you, and will attack any enemies that are not on your side for the rest of your time on board the ship. It is a very useful weapon later in the game, especially when dealing with screws. Having these big bastards on your side can make a huge difference as they deal masses of damage and are extremely durable. Each of the weapons in Void Bastards has its own purpose and usefulness. It is just a case of figuring out what role each play. It is here that a lot of classified strategy shooter comes into play, as specific weapons work better against certain enemy types. As previously mentioned, the Spiker is good for the likes of the Spooks and Scribes, who are generally hard to hit enemies, and the Red Spiker is extremely effective against Patients and Zeks. The Toaster is a very useful mid-range weapon for dishing out serious damage against easy to medium enemies, while the Riveter is useful in situations that involve lots of weaker enemies. The likes of the Zapper are great to stun enemies and temporarily shut down electronics, and the kitty bots are great for distracting enemies, a real lifesaver in the early stages when dealing with a lot of enemies and screws. There are a few weapons such as the Bouncer and the Cluster Flak that I didn't use all that much in my playthrough, but that was playing on normal difficulty. In the likes of Hard and Hard Bastard difficulty, these two weapons will play a much bigger role, especially the Bouncer. All the weapons in Void Bastards are great in their own right. They're extremely satisfying to use, they look and feel incredible, and I love how their design and colour changes as they are upgraded. Much like most things in Void Bastards, the sheer detail with the weapons hasn't been skimped on in any shape or form. Upon crafting a weapon, you unlock the possibility to unlock the ammo hunter for the ammo of that weapon. Crafting the hunter allows for the ammo of that weapon to spawn at specific areas of a ship that it wouldn't otherwise do, or drop from killing a certain enemy type. Crafting these make a big difference to your ammo supplies, and up until you unlock them, getting ammo for their weapon can be a real struggle. After that, the rest of the equipment are upgrades of some form or another. These upgrades include Carapace, which increases your overall health, Air Freshener that stops you suffering from nausea as easily, or Heart Starters that bring you back to life if you die, and Gunpoint and Bot Authority allow you to hack turrets and security bots. Every single piece of equipment has its very specific use and make the life of a Void Bastard slightly easier, and some even unlock new options for you when on board a ship. The higher the difficulty setting you play the game in, the more important these upgrades are, as they make a huge difference to your survival abilities. Once you've unlocked the part locator, you'll be able to use the locator by marking what item you want to make or upgrade. Once marked, an icon will display on the map leading you to the closest ship that will have the part in order to craft that item. A very useful tool to say the least. There's also the parts menu. Here you can see all the parts that are currently in your inventory, along with being able to craft parts too, assuming you have the materials. There are 5 types of materials, which are Bio, Data, Plas, Slag and Volts. These are obtained by picking up junk items while on board ships, and then upon returning to your ship they are broken down into materials that can be used to make parts. The higher tiered the part is, the more materials are required to craft the item. You can also recycle parts that you no longer have a use for and break them down to receive extra materials. The higher the tier of the part, the deeper into the nebula you will need to go, and the deeper you go, the more difficult the enemies and ships become. The crafting of parts plays a small but significant role in obtaining the parts needed to craft items. items. Most of the parts will be found on your travels through ships, but nevertheless the ability to craft them can make your life easier and speed things up a bit. It results in every single item in Void Bastards having usefulness, even the items that are considered junk. Most games add junk items in just for the sake of world building or environmental filling, but in Void Bastards everything is integrated into the gameplay and has its own specific use. I really wish more games did this. The whole workings of the crafting, materials and parts in Void Bastards is brilliantly designed. Every mechanic just comes together wonderfully to create an easy to follow, interesting, engaging and rewarding feature. Everything you need is there in front of you, all the information, all the UI details, no detail goes unchecked. And that is one of Void Bastards' greatest strengths. Every painstaking detail with the UI has been crafted to utmost perfection, making what would otherwise be an arduous interface easy and free-flowing. That is all the while combining it with the rest of the gameplay with complete and utter harmony. Let's move on to the FPS and scavenging side of things. This is where the System Shock and Bioshock influence comes into play. But don't get me wrong, if you're expecting Void Bastards to be the next System Shock or Bioshock, you will be disappointed. Void Bastards simply borrows some of the elements from those games. The FPS and scavenging side of the game only applies when you're boarding a ship. Here you need to search the ship for supplies and parts, all the while making sure to survive and not run out of oxygen in the process. Upon entering a ship, the layout is randomly generated. Each room within a ship has its own specific role, and each ship type has one or two rooms that are unique to it. For example, security ships will have the gene altering machine and at least one cell block. Medical ships will have the mart, ward and theatre, while the luxury cruiser has a dining room, suites and sometimes a casino. Each ship type also has its own unique environmental design and colour palette too. Security ships have a rusty gold metallic design to them. Medical ships have a primary red palette to it, while luxury cruisers are primarily purple with fancy designs. Or at least as fancy as Void Bastards gets. Almost all the rooms within a ship has a specific purpose that can be used to your advantage. In security rooms you can temporarily shut down all security on the ship, or with a bit of money, authorize a permanent shutdown. In the helm of the ship you can download a map from the computer revealing all lootable containers on board, and if you authorize the computer in exchange for merits, all enemies on the map will also be shown. The Atmo rooms allow you to replenish your oxygen supply. In the break room you can drink coffee to temporarily increase your damage and speed, and the Hab room has a machine that you can rid yourself of radiation and oil. The rooms having such specific uses adds a massive amount of strategy to the gameplay. Everything can be used to your advantage depending on your situation. For example, if you're having trouble getting through turrets or have a security bot on your ass, you can either shut down the security in the security room or turn off the power of the generator. And that is just one example. Along with that, you will always need to have a plan. What is your escape route? If there is a tough enemy on board, how will you deal with them? Is there a room to lock them in, or is there a quick way back to the ship? When do you stay exploring and when is it time to leave? There is so much to take into consideration. Void Bastards has a depth of strategy that you don't see in FPS games. Sure, the strategy shows its System Shock 2 inspiration, but because of the roguelike elements and each ship is different, it becomes far more intense and deeper. It is this strategy that makes the gameplay of Void Bastards so special, and really separates it from anything else. Loot can be found throughout an assortment of different containers that change depending on the ship type you're in. Containers include lockers, vending machines, suitcases, drawers, cabinets, and so on and so forth. What might be in these containers is dependent on the type of room they are located in, along with the type of ship. Some containers require merits or money to open. These containers always have a part in them, but what part it contains is dependent on where in the ship it is located. For example, if in the FTL bay, it will always be an FTL nozzle, so learning what parts are located in what area of the ship can really save you a lot of money in the long run, as spending merits to get parts you don't need anymore is just a waste. The looting element of the game is pretty simplistic, with it being a case of simply finding, clicking and going on your way, but the depth of the other elements really carries it along. But with that said, it still does the job. The opening of the containers and the excitement of finding out what is in it never gets old. When you do find that type of ammo you were hoping for, or that part you wanted, the excitement it brings never gets old. Then there is the combat of the game. Before boarding a ship you get to choose up to 3 weapons to bring with you. 1 firearm, 1 indirect and 1 device. If you have the gun nut trait you will have a 4th random weapon. As previously mentioned, each of the different weapons have their own purpose, with some being designed specifically for certain enemies. There are 11 enemy types in Void Bastards, with each one having 1 or 2 more powerful variations of the standard. The first is the tourist. These creatures are gelatinous blobs that wander around the various ships. They aren't aggressive and won't attack you, but if you get too close to them they will get scared and begin to shake, followed by exploding after a few seconds. The juvies are small, fast moving, foul-mouthed enemies that often hover their way around the ship. They tend to fire a few shots at you before moving around a bit and then firing at you again, all the while making insulting remarks like "surprise, butt face" or "alright dickwad" and the likes. Janitors are now transformed janitors of the ship. These act in a similar fashion to the juvies, but are a tougher early stage enemy of the game, and become a very regular occurrence in place of the standard juvies in the mid game. Scribes are a strange, cowardly and eccentric enemy who often take the odd few shots at you before retreating, all the while saying things like "out of order" or "good one Barbara" and other nonsensical quotes. Spooks are exactly as they sound. A ghost enemy type that tend to take a few shots at you before they phase out, often phasing back in behind you, taking a few more shots before repeating. A difficult enemy to face with just firearms, but a shot from the Zapper to stun them or poison them with the spiker, and you'll quickly make short work of them. Patients are the most bizarre enemy in the game and consist of a cluster of individual heads that move around and attack you, often screaming in pain and asking for help. Most weapons are not very effective against this enemy type, as each head acts as an individual enemy, but one blast from a rad spiker and they will be dead in a near instance. Zex are former executives of some kind that wander the ship, often spouting regulations and things being revoked and general bossy things. These enemies are weak but use a shield similar to that of the player's bouncer shield. The only way to kill these enemies is to get behind them, radiate them, or throw an explosive that will damage them from the back. Then there are the previously mentioned screws. These enemies are absolute juggernauts and are practically impossible to beat in the early stages of the game, especially in the harder difficulties. It is often best to just avoid them or lock them in a room until you get your hands on the likes of the Rifter or the Scrambler, which are absolute lifesavers in the later levels. After that you have the electronic enemies. Turrets, or gun points as they're called here, are powerful weapons that come in three variations. The standard gun point that shoots normal rounds at you, the rocket gun point that fires homing missiles, and the radiation gun point that not only fires rockets, but radioactive rockets that radiate you too. They're not so much of a problem in the lower difficulty settings and can be easily tanked, but in the harder difficulties the damage they deal is huge, resulting in you needing to be far more tactical when taking them on. Security cameras are on the lookout for clients, and if detected and you don't go into hiding or distract, the camera will activate the security bot on the ship. The security bot will then seek you out and attempt to destroy you. As for the security bots themselves, like with the gun points, they have several variations, each one being more powerful than the last. Get caught in the firing line of one of these bad boys, especially the warbot, and you'll be turned into mincemeat in no time, and not just in the hard difficulties either. The enemies of Void Bastards are great, and each has its own unique and humorous personalities that add to their already distinctive design and behaviours. No matter how many times a juvie calls you a butt face or dickwad, or floats around the place laughing in hysterics, you never quite get tired of it, and that is the same for all the enemy types too. That alone is a testament to the detail and excellent design of the enemies, not just from a gameplay standpoint, but from the standpoint of them being characters. It is incredible. As for the combat itself, it is really solid. There is a wonderful balance between combat and scavenging for supplies throughout the ship, where there isn't too much or too little of either. The guns all work extremely well and feel powerful and satisfying to use. The thing with Void Bastards that will either make or break the combat for players is that it is a strategy first and an FPS second. This isn't an FPS gameplay where skill will keep you alive. In Void Bastards, it's all about the brain power as opposed to the reflexes. You can't just easily sidestep or jump to the side to dodge enemy attacks. Instead, you need to use your surroundings, the environment and your equipment in an effective manner. You need to figure out what works in which scenario and make your own tactics in accordance to your playstyle. It is easy to at first assume that combat of Void Bastards is weak, but the truth is, if you think that, you are not playing the game in the way it is designed to be played. And I'm even going to admit, at first I was guilty of that myself. But once you get into the swing of things and begin to understand the workings of the combat, you really start to enjoy yourself, and before long you'll become completely engulfed in it. It is a style of combat that truly separates Void Bastards from all the rest. As a whole, the gameplay of Void Bastards is excellent. It merges together the elements of other titles such as Bioshock and System Shock 2 with that of the roguelike genre to create an utterly absorbing and addictive experience like nothing you've ever played before. And despite its repetitive nature, the level of variety, the enemies and general design and a good sense of humour just keep the game feeling completely fresh from start to finish. Once you get hooked into Void Bastards, it is truly a hard game to put down. The atmosphere to Void Bastards is incredible. There's that sense of horror and loneliness that you get from Bioshock and System Shock mixed with the hard-hitting and adrenaline-inducing combat. This is only further intensified by the soundtrack of the game. Each ship type has its own two tracks associated with it. One for the ambience, generally consisting of a quiet and slow track during exploration, and one for the combat that is fast-paced, loud and packs a punch. Each set of tracks for the ship types is quite different and varying in genres, in some form or another. The luxury cruisers have a more jazzy theme going through it for the combat, while a sense of desolation from the ambience. While when dealing with pirates, the ambience has a slow horror feel to it where you get that sense that something is coming and it's going to get you. But when the pirates board the ship, the track turns into all-out chaos with a fast-paced heavy metal track that is so different from everything else in the game, but feels so fitting due to the universe's crazy nature. When on the map and at the workbench, there's a calm to the atmosphere. When at the workbench, the track that plays has a busy yet relaxed tone to it that fits in with the crafting and engineering function of the screen, and the map screen track has that typical tone running through it of the vast blackness of space and travelling into the unknown. Every scenario of Void Bastards has a fitting atmosphere and track to match it that intensifies the whole experience, enhancing the horror feel with the ambience and the rush that comes with the action-packed combat. It is this extremely well made atmosphere that turns Void Bastards from a great game into something truly special. Void Bastards is everything I could have hoped for and more. It is such a brilliantly designed game in practically every way. It is a game that clearly shows its Bioshock and System Shock influences, especially with the aesthetic, the atmosphere and the depth, but at the same time it couldn't be any further away from either of those games. Instead, it has an identity that is completely its own. With there being no signs of a new Bioshock, and with the System Shock remake still a ways off, Void Bastards is a great game that fills in the gap despite its differences. It is a game that proves you can still have everything that makes those it inspires from great, while also changing up the formula to create something entirely different, and it does so with utmost grace. Void Bastards is an excellent game. Its gameplay is solid and deep, the combat fun and full of strategy, the atmosphere is fantastically absorbing, and the characters in the universe it is set in are interesting, comedic, and a treat to experience. What few frustrations the game does have are quickly drowned out by what is an otherwise fantastic experience. And with that, I give Void Bastards a 9 out of 10. Void Bastards is an absolute treat. It is one of those former AAA turned indie gems that comes into existence only every once in a while, and it is another game to add to the slowly growing list that proves that those who work in the AAA side of this industry still have that creativity and passion. They just need to have the shackles released and to let their imaginations run free. And when it does happen, you get a gem just like Void Bastards.